Hey gang, welcome back to Deuce X Musica. I'm Jimmy, aka Blendrix, with my co-host Gosh here. I'm hailing from Fort Collins, Colorado, in the USA. And Gosh, you want to tell everybody where you're at?
Well, I'm pretty sure you can figure out I'm somewhere in the Middle East. I'm from in a hotel cafe in Kuwait at the moment.
Kuwait City, Kuwait, right?
Actually, if you really want to get geographical, it's an area called Fahahil, which is where most of the oil refineries are at. So
Okay.
it smells great.
Do you run into a lot of expat Americans and like Europeans working there because of the oil stuff?
Actually, yeah. Most of the noise that you're hearing right now is because there's a table full of them right next to me.
Damn noisy Americans. Always thinking that the whole room belongs to them and nobody else is trying to have a conversation in here.
I mean, how dare they? In any case.
How dare they?
How dare they?
So we're actually picking up about halfway through a conversation that Gosh and I have been having, just as a sort of us talking like we do on a regular basis, and we got into a really fascinating conversation to the point where both of us kind of realized we should be recording this and making this our next episode. So we're backtracking over a conversation that we've already had at least a half an hour, 45 minutes of. So if it sounds like we're kind of stumbling around a little bit and not doing things exactly linearly, it's because we're trying to make sure we cover all of the interesting points that we discussed earlier. So we were discussing entertainment, the most banal of topics, and we were discussing how the mechanics of what it is that gets people interested in a fictional story, why it is that we buy into a boy meets girl, or Alien versus Predator, or whatever. The things that make us enjoy this it's universal. These stories appeal to everyone, no matter what the language is, no matter how old they are. It's something that's built into us. So kind of determined that for the most part, any story I can think of that's a sort of standard format, for most pop culture kind of consumption is falls along the lines of two goals that the protagonist is attempting to achieve. One is survival, and the other is replication or reproduction, passing on their genes. And I think that those are the things that we identify with on a deep level. We don't necessarily consciously identify with it and know that that's why we enjoy the story, but I think that ultimately that's what makes our the fictional stories that we get into fascinating. Is we like to identify with someone else who's also experiencing the same struggle that we are on a day-to-day basis. Gosh, your thoughts?
Well, and I'm sure some people can argue, what about comedies or such? But even comedies, really, it's usually a protagonist that's trying to survive a situation or to get a girl or some such. You can say, well, what about something like The Hangover? Well, essentially, The Hangover is about a guy trying to get back to get married. So even with that one, it's
the Hangover is a hero's journey. It's a weird, twisted version of the hero's journey, but the hero's journey it's basically the archetypal action movie, I guess not really action, but adventure movie, where really what's underlying all of this is that the protagonist is undertaking the risk of going on this adventure and surviving it. And then in the course of that adventure, they gain experience and usually gain loot or whatever. They sometimes bring home the girl that they were supposed to be getting from said adventure. So that I think that I don't know. I pretty much stick with my statement that that you can pretty much boil down almost any major story, aside from the really bizarre ones that are just interesting because of how bizarre they are. I think you can boil it down to those key factors.
I agree. I was just making the point that even in comedies and such, it's essentially the same thing, where it's survival or procreation.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing that we, I guess we'll just dive straight into it here. The main point that this took us to was essentially the psychosis of wealth. I don't quite recall how quite we got into that particular topic, but
we were talking about how
once
you've accumulated all of the protection and provisions that you can for yourself, you've say, we're imagining that the very first rich caveman, got to a point where he had his whole cave stuffed full of bear pelts, and he had 3 or 4 wives, like, constantly popping out babies, and pretty much he'd fortified the cave so that no wild animals could get in, none of the other cavemen could get in, pretty much sitting pretty there. But there's a physical limit to how much material wealth you can possess in a world where material wealth is actually material, where it has to have volume and mass, and it has to be transported, it has to be preserved. If it's food, it has to be stored in a certain way, and if it's things that are valuable like furs, you have to have enough manpower to be able to protect it all from other cavemen who want it for themselves. So the logistics of protecting a personal fortune in the days before the invention of currency prevented anybody from getting fabulously wealthy just due to the overhead of keeping up with their own possession volume. So, talking about,
I would say the use of the word fabulous is probably not quite the right term. We want to going with the point of this episode. It's abnormally wealthy to where it starts messing with the normal balance or normal procedure of things.
So yeah, you're right. When I say fabulously, I don't mean fabulous in a good way. I mean ridiculously, obesely wealthy, like the kind that's absurdly, ridiculous, stupidly wealthy. To where, if we're using the caveman analogy, if the caveman were to have stockpiled enough food for himself to live out the rest of his life, and his offspring, and his offspring's offspring, and his offspring's offspring's offspring, at some point, it becomes kind of a, like, well, how far down the line do I have to provide for my progeny? If they're really my seed, they should, if they're as awesome as I am, they should be able to take care of themselves, because that's what I did, right? So at some point, you kind of have to be able to leave off. I think that the creation of a system of storing value that doesn't take up hardly any space, or in today's modern economic systems where money can be stored with no volume whatsoever, it's all just ones and zeros on a stock exchange computer system or whatever. All of that is it's wealth that contributes and detracts from the overall well-being of humanity in very real terms, but none of the actual stuff of value has any substance. So there's nothing logistically preventing someone from getting way, way, way beyond any sort of means that they would ever need to provide for anything in their life, for all of the creature comforts that they could ever possibly need, plus more. And because of the fact that there's no longer a logistical barrier to that, that's given rise to a new psychosis that, and gosh, I think you had a better way of addressing it than I did. So,
well, it's madness associated with money. Part of it is the fact that I think there's a major separation in how how can I say? When you accumulate physical things, food, shelter, uh, things for you to stay alive, there's something physical there, and your mind can sort of grasp the process. But as you were saying, when you switch to a currency-based system, especially a digital currency-based system, there is nothing physical about it. It is ones and zeros. So is 1 million enough? Is 1 billion enough? Is 1 trillion enough? Is all the money on earth enough? There's no real way of understanding it. And I think us as an animal of sorts, a species of sorts, we suffer from being hoarders. Thing that is inconsequential, seeing numbers on the screen, I think that really affects our minds. Is when how many zeros is enough? With food, you can say, well, this will be enough for a year, 2 years, 3 years. But when it's $1 trillion, you're like, is that enough zeros?
And if you try to hoard 20 years worth of food, it starts to spoil on you. Whereas currency has no expiration date. It doesn't get in the way. All it does is just sit there until you need it. You can preserve your food for a while, but there's a certain point where it is no longer possible to continue building more and more normal supplies for sustaining life.
It's almost a natural limit.
That's the disconnect with money. Yeah,
it's almost a natural limitation, like a law of physics, where it's physically impossible to store any more of a commodity. But whereas with money, there really isn't. You can store more money than anybody will ever need for the entire rest of the human existence, and it won't go bad, like you're saying. So, and
similar in a way. Can I say it's the good analogy would be the faster you drive your car, the more wind resistance you get, the more drag, and so the faster you want to drive, the worse your gas mileage gets, and it takes more overhead in terms of force to push that mass through an ever thicker, harder, more resistant cushion of air that's building up in front of this thing. So in a way, it's like that, where the more in a physical supplies and rations and stuff like that economy, the more you accumulate, the more it gets in the way and keeps you from accumulating more. But in the currency society, having excess currency lying around actually facilitates the generation of additional excess currency, because when you have $1 billion that you're not using, you can loan it to someone and then you get interest on that back. And whereas you didn't loan someone your steak,
exactly right, yeah. And you don't get more meat back after you loan it out. So I think we are designed to work a certain way, and we've entered now a new era where the things we've created go against our actual nature or our understanding. And
they've just outmoded our instincts. There's so many things that we do instinctively that are completely outdated now because of our inventions, and that goes for all kinds of things. No, not just money in this situation. There's all kinds of technological things that are outdating our, the fact that we get things like jet lag. That's a remnant of having a regular sleep cycle that's based on a sunrise, sunset. After sunset, it's dark. You go to bed. Now you can have the lights on all night long and have a sleep cycle that's totally out of whack with the rest of the world. So it's not just money.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
And that's another. I'll get back from it here, but it's an argument that I'm sure a lot of people listening have with, say, their parents, where they tell them, well, you need to wake up early so that you can do things, and then sleep early and things of that nature. And this is a remnant of, you have to wake up early to tend the fields and catch as much of the natural sun as you can to work. But now it's a 24-hour world, and we don't really need sunlight or natural light to do our work. We have artificial lighting, number one, and number two, since the world is working on a 24-hour cycle, it doesn't really matter when we get our work done. We're not out in the field. We're not out doing things physically. So that's another outmoded remnant of, I guess, our past. And this is the crux of the conversation today. Was a lot of these things are causing mental degradation, not mental degradation. Mental deviance might be a better
disconnect. Word. It's a what do they call it? Dissociation.
Dissociation with just how we naturally conduct ourselves and
with other people.
With other people and the value of other people and even the value of the things we have, where usually you will notice, and there are anomalies and we'll get to those in a bit, but you will notice the more wealthy people are, the more they assume there is a separation between them and the normal folk. Or actually, no, they would consider themselves the normal folk, and then the people that are not as rich as they are would be subhuman, as you were saying earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So
they don't feel the need to give those people the same consideration that they would give to themselves or to someone they consider their peer in that situation. But that ends up putting them on a pathway that basically says, okay, well, there's all kinds of things that they're willing to do to accumulate more wealth that on the, all of humanity scale, they're doing atrocious crimes against humanity. Sometimes it's that bad, and other times it's just they're just being really sleazy and taking advantage of people over and over again. We were mentioning that some of the wealthiest people got that way by being very, very conniving and ruthless, cutthroat business dealings. They lay people off when it's strategically most convenient to them, not really considering what time of year it is, when people's finances tend to be the tightest. You hear about layoffs right before Christmas, that kind of thing. That happens as a result of people looking at bottom line numbers. They're like, well, we just had Black Friday and our books aren't looking that great, so I guess we should just lay a bunch of people off. And
the primary thing is they don't consider them people. They consider them resources or assets. So, and the
language of business even integrates that. The whole idea of the human resources department, it makes it sound like we're cargo or like chattel.
Exactly right. And it's you hardly see any large businesses. You see small businesses that are more democratic and communal in nature, where the need. But I don't know any corporation that is people centric. Can you think of any?
Well, they all say that they're people-centric. The very first thing on every corporation's mission statement is with the end goal of serving the needs of our customer being at the forefront of everything we do, blah, blah, blah. They say that, but they structure it that way because they know that treating the customer well ultimately leads to profit. And if you look at the charter of any corporation, basically it's either a not for profit or a for profit. The vast majority of corporations are for profit. Their entire reason for existence is to generate profit. And because of the fact they don't really get any more specific than make money, they don't really say anything about how or what degrees to which you are willing to go to achieve that end. And because corporations are not people and they can't have a prison sentence and they can't be arrested, they can, as an organism, do much more psychopathic kind of actions on against their employees, against their customers, the environment, than any one person would be able to do and still feel like they were a real human being. And that's what's so screwed up about corporations being considered people now, because it's like, well, if they're people, we still can't lock them up, so they're not people.
Well, exactly right. And And I guess an interesting question would be, do psychopathic people make corporations, or do corporations make psychopathic people? So
I don't think psychopaths are made. There's a lot of the modern like neuroscience is boiling it down to there's a genetic flaw in people's brains when they're born. If they're born as a psychopath or a sociopath, they're just they are that way. And the vast majority of sociopaths and psychopaths live their life completely unnoticed because they realize at an early enough age that they're different, and in order to fit in, they force themselves to sort of go through the motions of looking like they're experiencing empathy and other things like that. But that's out of self-preservation interest. For a corporation, there's no perceived benefit. There's no reason for them to attempt to look like they're sort of experiencing empathy and having things like that. I think we may have lost the connection here. Gosh, are you still with me? Hey, Gosh. Okay, there you are.
Okay. Well, I mean, that could be taken another way, and we need to bring it back to topic here soon. But
okay.
but I mean, people might. How do we say? It could be like a dormant characteristic that being given latent characteristic that maybe being put into a position like we're using the example of the banks earlier, to where suddenly they're like, oh, now the fact that I am a psychopath would work. Actually, that could be argued too. Do people realize they're being psychopaths?
It probably depends on how intellectually like achieved they are. Like if this person has studied psychology or has like done a lot of reading about sociology and stuff, they might begin to self-identify and say, I've heard about these people that don't ever experience empathy. I can't think of a single time I've given a hoot about what happened to anybody else. They might begin to realize that, but ultimately, whether or not they're conscious of their circumstances is not really germane. The result is that what they do happens regardless of whether they know that they're being a psychopath or not.
Exactly. Because usually, and we'll bring in the two examples we were talking about, but I don't. Most heads of large corporations don't have empathy or humanitarian leanings or such. Usually, they're very ruthless, and as you're saying, they treat people like chattel. But an example that we were talking about earlier was somebody, and I consider him an anomaly, and that's up for discussion. But somebody like Bill Gates, where he's not head of Microsoft anymore, but he created Microsoft. But the guy is very humanitarian. He cares about people, and he was more interested in the technology and the product of his work than he was in the monetary value of his work. And
I think it was.
It's a rare thing to run into somebody that's ahead of something so large and important that has those kinds of leanings. We go towards banks, and you never hear about humanitarian leanings that way. If they have to crush a economic livelihood of a country to make profit, then that's what they did. They did it in 2008. They did it in 2001, I believe, with the tech bubble crash. They did it even in the, I think it was end of the 80s with the video game crash, where it was just what is good for us and everybody else be damned. If our employees are out of job, out of money, and they can't provide, it's not our problem. As long as we make it. And now 2008 is 6 years behind us, and we're still not recovered.
Right.
And
I think the difference is you got like somebody like Bill Gates, who was at the helm of Microsoft. And I think what I had mentioned to you in our previous iteration of this discussion was that I think that Bill Gates was in the right place at the right time. He had the drive, the sort of like humanitarian leanings in the first place, but I think that those leanings actually caused him to be passionate about his work, so passionate to the point where he was just doing what he could to make this company really good, to treat its employees well, to make a great product, to like advance the technological achievement of society. So much to the point where he got all the way to retirement before he even, I think he got all the way there and then realized, oh, look at all this cash I have lying around. I need to do something with this. I always feel like he kind of realized at one point, oh, well, this is something I can do to further, even more. I can contribute back to the progress of humanity. But I think there are rare circumstances where someone who's got the work ethic and the humanitarian kind of mindset to head up an organization where they do keep their employees' well-being and their client relationships at the forefront of their all their dealings, and don't really necessarily make the bottom line the first thing that comes up in every discussion, but realize that the bottom line will take care of itself when you're doing the right thing. And those people, if they actually have to be so awesome in their work ethic and their ability to avoid all of the times where nice people do get taken advantage of. Somehow they've got to be shrewd enough to where they don't get walked all over. So I think there's a sweet spot where you end up being in the right time in the right place, where you found a company that is well positioned to take off and generate enough revenue that you can be generous. Whereas I think that anybody that wants to that's heading up any of these major like bank corporations and stuff like that, they're more likely to be the kind of person that had to step on heads and heels and toes and elbows to get to where they are. They basically shove their way to the top, and frequently these people will be very like superficially charismatic, and that's what it takes to win over a team that's willing to do your dirty work for you, things like that. And it's almost like for the most part, if you want to get really ridiculously stupidly rich, you have to be the kind of person who has no scruples about ripping people off and having no sense of duty to take care of the people who have helped build the organization to where it is that you're currently sitting on top of.
And we were also talking about how much easier it is in corporations to not have to take personal responsibility for the destruction of the society that you're, I guess, overseeing or heading or such. Say, as in with banks, you're not, as much as the blame could be laid on them, they all say, well, it's not technically my fault. It was the finances department that didn't quite see this one thing. So it's not really my fault. All I was doing was just my job. And it becomes easier to be a psychopath or a sociopath when you are not held or there's no repercussions for what it is you're doing. And we were also talking earlier about a lot of these people put in place some sort of agreement or fixture or such that there's no punishment.
It's lobbyism. Most of it's lawmakers get like being in the pocket of large corporations, to where the people who are really putting the the thumb screws to society, they've actually got a backup plan where they have enough high-ranking officials in there. Even if the whole thing does come crashing down, they won't end up ever having any repercussions for them personally, because of how much bribing they've done on the back end, or how much sabotage they have done to the system that is designed to keep people from going off the rails like that. And that was when we said that if someone is so callous that they have the ability to consciously go out of their way to disable the safety measures that are trying to prevent them from being a dick, just so that they can be a dick without getting in trouble, because the only reason that they're not being a dick is because they're afraid they'll get in trouble. They're so far gone at that point. They're breaking the law so that they can break the law. And that's I feel like it takes a person having had that kind of leaning before they got to that position. They had to have had that kind of I guess, personality type that they would say, oh yeah, doesn't matter, whatever it takes to make the most money.
I guess so, because I mean, if you did have scruples, then you would probably have been kicked out of that position long ago, or been stepped on, or removed,
or you would have told yourself, no, I will not go that far. Speaking personally, and when I was working at the bank, there was a time, when I started working there, was at the very peak of economic prosperity, and right around like 2007, right before the crash in 2008. Starting in 2008, 2009, 2010, things got progressively more and more strict in terms of what the bank was telling me I had to do as an employee in order to not get in trouble. And they got pushier and pushier and pushier. And at certain points, I felt morally conflicted. I felt like I needed to either break the company's policy in order to be a moral person, or I had to, break my own moral code in order to follow the company policy. And that's a raw deal. You don't want to be put in a position where you're either, risking your own personal integrity or your job. And people who have a conscience that's intact will eventually get to a point where that's too much. There's too much of that. I forget. There's actually a cognitive dissonance. Too much of that going on for an extended period of time will break someone down. Whereas someone who doesn't have the scruples, someone who doesn't have any sort of care about other people's well-being, that doesn't factor in. They don't feel morally obligated to treat others the way that they would want to be treated, and so for them, it makes no difference.
Yeah, and this is kind of an interesting point. Because, I mean, for the most part, people are semi-moral, but there's always that line of benefits that you get that would start making people consider. If somebody was to say, Jimmy, I'll give you $40,000 if you do this wrong thing, you might say, no, I'm too much of a moral guy. If they say, I'll give you $1 million to break your code, you might really start considering it. And once you get into like, I'll give you $10 million, I think you, I, or anybody listening, it's going to be next to impossible to say no. You say, you know what, fuck it, I'm looking out for me, and you might go with it. Does that make you a psychopath? Does that make you a sociopath? Is that
because you're actually having the dilemma. If you have the dilemma and then you make the conscious decision that the benefit gigantic stack of cash is more important than the amount of harm that's going to be caused to whoever by the thing that you're doing, or you might even try to rationalize it and say, I'm going to have so much money that I'm going to be able to pay back whatever wrong had committed. To me, that would probably be my breaking point. If someone offered me $1 million to go key someone's car, I'd say, okay, I'll do it. I will take the $1 million and go buy the guy a new car. Be like, no harm, no foul. Okay, cool.
Yeah, but what if there were stipulations like you could not do that? I'll give you 10 million.
So like a stipulation, like you can't wish for more wishes with a genie.
Well, kind of, yeah. It's with the wrecking of the financial system, it's you will make a lot of money and you will not be able to fix it.
Right.
So there's no. It's
you're right. You're right. I don't think I would be able to do it, but some people did, and part of the reason they were able to is because of the fact that they collectively distributed the guilt for these misdeeds amongst a large organization of, when you've got a company that's like two guys in a truck, for instance, and you cut your partner out of a deal, that's a very personal thing. But if it's a corporation with tens of thousands of employees and they've got different departments with different leaders and people, coming and going on vacation stuff and like things falling through the cracks, especially things like oversight, where things are supposed to be getting checked for accuracy, things are supposed to be getting checked for inconsistencies. Things get slipped in under the guise of, oh, well, it's just because we were all so slammed with work, it just must have slipped in. When they can make that the excuse, it's a lot easier to blend in as a psychopath or sociopath in an organization like that, because people want to give you a break for for something accidental that happened, and all the banks made it sound like, oh, it was an accident that this financial crisis happened. But if you really look at the people who benefited, they had to have known. For them to make that much money, they had to have known exactly what was going to happen. They had to bet against the economy everybody else was buying, so that they could cash out when the whole thing went in the crapper. And so that some of those people knew exactly what was going on. They said, nope, I'm going to sit here and watch Rome burn, play my fiddle.
Exactly right. So it really is an interesting question. So do we all have well, not all, do most of us have latent psychopathic tendencies?
Well, we have tendencies to be selfish, and that all comes down to the whole survival and replication thing, because your survival and replication does not depend on the well-being of Bob from accounting, because Bob isn't the father of your children, and his house isn't the one that you sleep in. It's when the people that you're dealing with have such distant connections, where the only thing you have in common with them is the fact that you're both human planet Earth in our solar system, and and as far as we know, we're the only human beings in the universe. But if that's all you have in common with this guy, you might have less. I think people have less motivation to do the right thing when it comes to the well-being of other people, because it doesn't affect them. A lot of people will still try to do what they can to not harm other people, but that is a gray area. There's always going to be, and the more that you do things in the gray area, the bigger that gray area becomes. It's almost like, playing in a sandbox and having the sand spill out over the edges. The more that you dance around these things that are morally questionable, the more things you're comfortable with putting in the questionable box as opposed to off limits.
Well, exactly right. And back, say caveman days, if you were going to fuck somebody over, it was for very valid reasons. I have to survive. I'm taking food. I'm taking shelter. And now it's gotten to a point with the current currency system to where, do you need, to make $1 trillion in profits? What is that going to? What on earth does any human need that much money for? Like, what could you buy that you would not be able to survive without for that amount of money?
Right. The fact that there's nothing currently on the market that costs that much money. Like, you could buy all of the things and still have more money. Like,
Exactly.
And if that's the case, the thing is that logic doesn't apply. You were just saying, it's like hoarders. Hoarders they're not thinking about the fact that they've already got enough teddy bears and weird figurines from this place, and paper clips that they stole from Office Max. They don't do a mental accounting process. They're not going, okay, I have enough now. They're stuck in a loop where their brain is rewarding them for acquisition, because that, historically speaking, was a very integral part of survival, was to acquire the means through which to survive and procreate. And so, because of the fact that we don't really have a mechanism that says, okay, we've acquired all that we need, now what? Instinct doesn't cover that, probably because of the fact that most cavemen died from all kinds of things by the time they reached the age of 30. So they barely had enough time to build a shelter, accumulate enough furs for a few years of winters, and pop a few babies out of the next nearest cave girl, and then they were dead. So they didn't have enough time to sit around and go, okay, well, now what? But now we do end up having all this and like excess free time, excess resources. So this is where we got talking about skyscrapers and like really large monuments that pretty much exist for the sole purpose of demonstrating our existence, proving to the whole world how much resources this person or this organization has, and saying, hey, our tower's bigger than yours, suck it.
Exactly. And on that point we were talking about, it's not even just monuments anymore. We monetize our monuments to make you already. Let's take the Burj Khalifa, the tallest tower, the tower in Dubai, the tallest tower in the world. It's not even just a monument; it's a monetized monument. You are so rich that you can build the tallest tower in the world. You already have the resources to do that, and on top of that, you're still monetizing it. You're renting it out for office spaces, or using it as a hotel. It's just not enough. There is no longer any natural braking system for us to say, okay, this is the maximum amount of everything. So whatever.
Here's what I think this is kind of like almost getting to the point where our previous conversation had kind of where we decided to do a rewind. I'd like to posit that we take this in a sci-fi direction, because at this point, if this keeps happening, where people who are really, really ridiculously wealthy keep getting more and more ridiculously wealthy, and then thereby sort of as a consequence depriving another segment of the population of the necessary resources to get by, you're going to end up having, I think, right now we've already got this vast difference in classes, and I think that as a result of classes not socializing with each other, that if this keeps up, for a few thousand years, we will end up speciating, which is the verb for creating a new species. I think we'll end up having two different versions of human beings, where there's one that's the lower class working grunt kind of class of human being, and then there will be this more elite class where they don't actually end up doing any work. All they do is sort of coordinate the labors of the other
the bourgeoisie class. It's already happening.
Yeah, but there was no actual difference in species at that point. I was just kind of saying, if we were to extrapolate this and say, what happens if this continues unchecked? Do we end up having a completely separate class of human beings that turns into a separate species that eventually can no longer even interbreed, even if they wanted to? And that's where we get into things like, I remember, did you ever read The Time Machine?
Yes.
So you got the what was it, the Morlocks and the doofy surface dwelling.
I forget the names, but you have essentially a predator class of a predator class of humans, and well, but they're predators, and then you have the prey species of humanity, and they used to be. But let me make this point. It's already going in this direction. This is all relying on the fact that we don't blow each other to kingdom come before that time comes. But we already
have to make that assumption for any sort of science fiction hypotheses.
Exactly right. But I mean, genetic modification is a very real thing. It's already in its beginning steps right now. And it's going to be a very expensive thing, and it's only going to be the super rich or super elite that are going to be able to afford it. If you want, your kids to be physically fit and smart, have no genetic predisposition to cancer or such, you can genetically you genetically engineer that, and then you have the rest of the people who have to just deal with being subhuman essentially at that point.
Being by comparison, being completely faulty and not worthy of good jobs, not worthy of consideration for public office, for even for military service. You'll end up having this sort of species of human being that's basically just inferior in pretty much every way. Their eyes go bad, their teeth rot out, and because at that point, I feel like they won't be the major, what's considered the revenue generators for society. They'll be like continually edged out more and more, and to the point where they might, never actually get a proper education, because the people who are controlling all of the policies that dictate where funding for education goes. I mean, it could go really, really badly, especially when you consider the fact that if it's the psychopaths that are making the most money right now, and psychopaths end up breeding with other psychopaths out of necessity because, you don't want to breed with one of those plebeians, you end up getting this whole species of ruthless kind of no
predators.
Sympathy, no empathy, no compassion, no humanitarianism, like basically a land walking sharks, as
Right.
opposed to these increasingly more and more vulnerable, edged out lower class people. That's frightening, very frightening.
And keep in mind, and this is happening right now, a lot of military and security technologies are turning automated. So you don't even have to worry about having a biological class of people defending this upper class of people, because it'll be robots or pieces of technology that are protecting them, drones, automated turrets, that kind of thing. So you don't have to say, well, are they going to turn on me? You don't have to worry about it. It's already put in place.
Yeah. If they were human, you'd be paying them enough to where they wouldn't ever turn on you. And if they're robots, you don't have to worry about them turning on you unless someone hacks them. But guess it turns out that all your enemies are so undereducated that they don't even know how to use whatever computer system it is, let alone hack into it. So that whole paradigm is continues stacking the chips higher and higher and higher in the corner of the already largely favored. Everybody knows they're gonna win. It's almost like, I feel like as if we're watching a boxing match between Floyd Mayweather and
Steve Urkel.
Steve Urkel, yeah, there you go. So and then so it's already an unfair fight, and now we're actually going to put a blindfold on poor old Steve, and we're going to hack off one of his legs, so he's already bleeding to death, as it is. And if he doesn't get immediate tourniquet on his leg, he's going to be dead in 5 minutes. But he's also getting pummeled by Floyd Mayweather. I just feel like it's a really, really frightening possibility. And going back to the whole Bill Gates thing, I like the fact that there are people out there who have achieved success and wealth, who have then turned around and made an example of what people should do when they are presented with that circumstance. Bill Gates actually made I don't know if it's like a formal thing, but I know that he basically went around to all the wealthiest people he could find, and he basically just dared them to do what he did. He's like, I challenge you to dump all of your personal wealth into the betterment of humankind. Let's make this.
But how many people took him up on that?
Kind of out of I don't know, probably out of I can't not do that now because that really makes me look like a dick. but
this is the thing,
I don't think any of them went as far as he did. Although there are exceptions, I know that there's one guy who was definitely in the Forbes top 25 or top 50 or something like that, wealthiest men in the world, and he went even further than Bill Gates did. He gave away everything but his last $1 million. I mean, I'm sure he already had his house paid off and all that other stuff, but he gave away everything, just liquidated out all of it and gave it to, I don't know if it was to charitable organizations or to science research or something like that, but it was definitely like a whoa. That guy basically just did the financial version of Harry Carey, but kind of for a good cause. So I'm very
and I don't want to rag on whoever that person is, but he probably has things in place where he will reaccumulate his wealth rather quickly.
Well, most of it's habits. It's people that he knows. It's the habits that he's gotten into in his life. The fact that this is another thing. Money accumulates money on its own. That when you've got $1 million, 1,000 of it to someone and earn a tiny bit of interest off of it, and especially with the loaning system, the way that the banks are set up, you don't even have to worry about your loan getting defaulted on because the federal government guarantees against default. So you can, if you have enough money to where you've got so much excess that it's not even doing anything sitting there, you can then use that to accumulate more. I almost feel like in the caveman analogy, it'd be like, well, I'm going to take all my spare deer carcasses and throw them in the cave over here. And tomorrow I'm going to come back and there's going to be 30 more carcasses in there that just randomly appeared magically. That wouldn't have happened before. You used to deal with spoilage. Now it's almost like the opposite of spoilage. You let money sit around and it creates more rather than dwindling.
But keep in mind with that, wherever money increases, it's decreasing somewhere else. So your static wealth is accumulating value by making somebody else's wealth devalue.
Right, because they're having to give you all the money back plus more that they didn't have before, that they had to work with the sweat of their back, whereas you didn't work for that money, and especially like $500,000 in interest off of a loan you made to someone else. Then you loan that money to someone else. That money you didn't make in the first place. Someone else made that money. All you're doing is saying, here you go. That to me is the definition of the least you could do. And that's kind of, I don't know. This probably makes me sound like a total Marxist or whatever, but I think that's despicable to like continually build greater and greater sums of wealth and continue to use it. Even I would say it's probably more, less reprehensible for someone to just let the money sit all by itself, but to actually turn around and use it to extract more money out of other people is like leveraging your already aggressive position to get further aggressive and like pummel your opponent into deeper submission.
Let me. That actually makes an interesting segue. There is actually, I don't know how familiar you are with the Islamic banking system. Are you familiar at all?
You told me that they don't charge interest, but they have some sort of weird like loophole where they can still sort of charge interest without it actually being called interest, right?
Well, no, actually. Let me explain.
Oh, okay.
I like this system. I am on board with this system. The agreement is, or the rule is if you have a static amount of money that you are not using, you get charged 2.5% tax on that money. But this is the thing.
Okay.
But this is the thing. If you invest that money, then you don't get charged. So if you are investing in, say, something that is good for your society or community, you don't get charged tax on that money. But if you're just sitting on it, then the state takes it to use it for infrastructure projects, building schools, hospitals, that kind of thing. So it encourages you to make use of wealth. So I like that system because it's proactively encouraging you. If you're wealthy, then use your wealth. Don't just sit on it. It doesn't. If you just keep it, it doesn't accumulate anything, and in fact, you actually get penalized. But if you're using it, then you don't. So I do like that system, and whether we get called Marxist, communist, whatever, there are benefits to those systems. People say capitalism is the way to go, and we are seeing what It's essentially wealth begets wealth, and there's nothing to stop you, and you'll crush anybody who tries to get in on it. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
with those other systems where there are some sort of balances in place, it's healthier for society. It's almost as if those systems have the braking systems that were removed when we switched to a currency-based system,
Yep.
because capitalism doesn't have those braking mechanisms in place.
I don't necessarily think that capitalism and the Islamic banking system methodology are incompatible. I think that it's totally possible for a capitalist society to implement that version of interest rather than the current version, which is charge interest to the person who's borrowing it. I mean, it kind of makes sense in a certain regard that people who need to borrow money ought to have to give something for the privilege of borrowing it. I guess I understand that there's some sort of that interest is under the current model considered their payment for the privilege of borrowing money for the time that they borrowed it. But if under the system you're describing, the idea is let's the rich people and the not so rich people, let's get together and short Uncle Sam out of his cut, because if we work together and we build our own schools and roads and things like that with the funds that we're loaning to one another, then the government won't even need to get the taxes out of the account to build the roads and schools and stuff like that. So it's almost like it sounds like that system would actually promote a true laissez-faire capitalism society if it was implemented right. And I guess the only thing I'm thinking that I probably haven't considered some sort of angle where people could exploit a loophole in that system, and still get the laws to favor their
Well, I mean, there's
accumulation.
any system you're going to have somebody or people that are going to try finding loopholes. And even in the Islamic system, there is need for government, but the primary difference is government is not a profit generating establishment. Government is just oversight, and the money that gets taken out is actually held by it's called House of Zakat, and essentially what it is it's just a bank that amounts of money to people in need and doesn't collect taxes. I mean, it doesn't collect interest on that money, because this is what I like about this method of thinking, and not just because it's Islamic. I think it's a much more wholesome system. You lend money not as a service, but as a thing that is necessary to have society function well. If you have people that can afford their house, they can afford food, that's not a privilege that I'm using. That's a necessity that I need. If just because you coming to me and needing money, is showcasing that there is something wrong with a situation, and you need that money to fix that situation. I should not charge you extra money for that service, because I should not be benefiting off of your need.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to something like, if I don't pay, I will not have a home, or I will not have food for my family. That's not a service. That's just a basic necessity.
It seems to me preposterous that it's impossible for someone working at a standard entry level job, that at that level it's pretty much impossible for them to provide for their own shelter, food, clothing, and a modest amount of savings for the odd sort of disastrous event, like breaking a limb or something like that. If you can't afford simultaneously to have a vehicle that works and a place to live where the heat is on and the electricity is on and there's running water, these are, I mean, obviously they're used to be luxuries, but they're now kind of considered bare necessities, the basic, building blocks of a home. If you can't afford to do that on an entry-level salary, that means the system is broken. And the fact that there's some people out there who are making enough money to cover all of those things for a whole neighborhood of people in a day of their paycheck. And that day they didn't even go to work. That day they were taking paid vacation on they were golfing in Pebble Beach. So
Right. I mean,
that
there are
is
obviously
represent and they're
there
not
are
what they're
obviously
doing is not providing that much extra value to society.
this is one of the reasons why I dislike banks, because I think banks are where wealth actually gets destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And because this again, if you want a normal functioning car, I think that is something that if you have a job, you should be able to afford. If you want a Lamborghini, that is something else. You have
Right.
to do extra work to acquire that. But if you just need to get like a Ford Focus or something
Mm-hmm.
just to be able to get to work and take your kids
Yeah.
to school, I don't
Right.
think that should be a life altering decision.
Right. And a reliable
And
one too. Everybody's going to say, "Oh, you can pick up a car for $1,500." It's like, well, okay, of course you can, but it's going to break down on you in a month. And if you're already at the bottom of the totem pole and you show up late to work by an hour because of the fact your car broke down on the side of the road, that ends up further pushing you down under the jackboot heel of the elite class. So the
what
fact that
and
there's so many of these things that are considered basic necessities for even functioning society that are hard to afford, for people having to go without, or they're having to like share a car between two working parents of a full family, like things like that are happening all over the world, and it didn't used to happen in the U.S., but it's happening here a lot more often, and that's I think why we're having this conversation, because it's finally like becoming readily apparent that this is an issue that needs to be addressed.
exactly right. And I do topic here. There was it wasn't really a discussion; it was an argument. Somebody was telling me that those people demanding the minimum salary be raised to $18 or so at McDonald's, what have you. Their argument to me was, well, if they wanted to not work at McDonald's, then maybe they should have just gotten an education, not be working at McDonald's. But to me, that education is very expensive now. Getting a college education is going to set you back what, $60,000-$70,000. So
also having
you,
a college
you
degree doesn't guarantee you a great job either. I've got a college degree. I'm basically working an entry level position. It's been now, let's see here, 7 years since I graduated college, and I'm making less now than I was the day I got out of college. So just having a degree doesn't guarantee you squat. If I had to take out loans to
well,
go to the college, I'm very fortunate my grandparents paid for my education. But if I'd had to take out loans, I'd be in a really bad spot. And I know that there's
and
plenty of my peers who are in a really bad spot because of that. They were sold the lie that college education guarantees you, a upper five figures, low six figures job right out of school, and it doesn't at all.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And I think any minimum that your situation and mine, we're pretty, I think, equal on our financial situation. My apartment is nothing astounding by any stretch of the imagination. I have a nice car, but it's a very normal car. No options, no anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't go out. I don't do anything. I go to work. I go work out, and I go back home. And in the next probably month or so, I'm going to have to take out a third loan to just kind of cover all the crap that I'm dealing with. And I'm not even doing anything. I'm not.
Yeah, this is like not even having any major health problems popping up on you, which like who knows when that's going to happen. But it happens to everybody, and it happens more frequently to people who haven't had consistent preventive health care, which you have to be able to afford. It's like just having that extra amount prevents really expensive things from happening to you, and when those expensive things happen to you, you already can't afford it. You get further in debt, and I don't know. I have people tell me like, "You should go back to school, man. You should go back and get your master's degree." I'm like, I'm already in plenty of debt. If I had to take out student loans to get a master's degree that I still have no guarantee of getting a good job after that, I'm further in debt, possibly, than I might even be able to get out of. I might have to declare bankruptcy. And I know that's not the end of the world. There's plenty of people who have, but I shouldn't go into a situation knowing full well that is a distinct possibility. That should be like the distant worst case scenario of anything that I would decide to get into now. But because of the fact that is a distinct possibility, I'm not going to go back to grad school until I've got something that I know I'm going to be able to pay for my own education without having to take out a bunch of loans against it. So,
and that brings up another couple of interesting points. One thing that's always kind of confused me about the policy in the States is why people are so violently against nationalized healthcare. I don't think that people should pay to have access to normal healthcare. I don't think that's a communist thing. And also the same with schooling. I don't see why you have to pay $80, $90, $100,000 to get a college education. Why is it not free?
Mm-hmm.
Why is access to healthcare not free? Why should, if I have some sort of sickness or something, why do I have to pay? And it's not cheap in the States. You're paying probably $700-800 a month for medical insurance.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason. I don't get why that's such a rubbing point for people. Where it's like all these.
I think I have a theory about it. At least like a pretty good chunk of the reason why that is, and that is because the thing that made America great at first was the fact that we had such a strong sense of individualism and said people can be who they want, they can do what they want, they stay out of each other's way. Don't tread on me. It was very, very individualistic. The whole reason we were able to settle the entire United States in such a short period of time is because people were encouraged to go out there and settle the land in the middle of nowhere. They were given a plot of land and said, go out there and make more people. and that sense of pride in our individualism has carried over, and where that used to be something that helped us generate lots of prosperity quickly, it has now gotten to a point where that same sort of sense of individualism makes it so that when someone proposes that we set up a system where the taxpayers pay for a working for their money, they feel I'm an individual. I earned that money. That's my money. You don't get to take my money. I'm not a non-smoker. I don't want to be paying for, a person who's a smoker having to go get his lungs, ripped out and have synthetic ones chucked in every 3 years because he wants to keep smoking. People have an overblown sense of their entitlement to the fruits of their labor. And I think that other cultures, the fruits of your labor aren't yours. They addition to society, and you're paid for your efforts, and to a reasonable degree you're allowed to decide what you want to do with your funds. But for the most part, what you're trying to do is your job is necessary for the functioning of society, and then a good portion of the monetary fruits of that labor goes into supporting the parts of society that don't have a profit motive, or that profit motive in that part of society would be a conflict of interest. I actually think it's kind of screwed up that the medical industry is a for-profit business.
I agree.
I feel like the medical industry and the penal system are two things that should not be for-profit at all, yet they are.
I'll add a third one.
That's a totally awkward position to be in as a business owner, where you're trying to turn a profit. Oh, what can we do to turn a profit when we work in the private prison industry? More prisoners. Let's talk to our buddies over at the Senate and see if we can get them to pass some ridiculous laws that'll get some more people in prison.
Yeah, well, I'll add a third one to that. As far as utilities, I think anything essentially that is for the basic functioning of society should not be for profit. And then a lot of people argue that it'll be inefficient. That's not the fault of whoever it is that's paying into that system. I remember when Excel switched over to a private company, utility prices jumped through the roof. I was paying maybe $30-40 a month, and it jumped up to like $200 to $300 a month. That's not.
I would say, okay, so if it's privately owned, the inefficiency that's in that system is the fact that there's this gigantic horde of private shareholders that are leeching money off the organization and not providing any value in return. They're just saying, give me my dividends. That is inefficiency in a certain regard. If you have a not-for-profit organization, they take every dollar in excess of what it takes to pay their employees and to maintain their equipment. All of that gets put back into better equipment or keeping the bills low for their customers, which is why, in general, credit unions end up being a better place to keep your money than banks, because they end up giving you better interest rates because of the fact that they don't have a bunch of hungry shareholders demanding that they increase their fees so that they can get more dividends.
Exactly right. So it's bringing it back a little bit. I have no problem with people making wealth for themselves. I have zero issues at all. But there are basic things out there that I hate the idea that people are making money off of it. The fact that you need an operation and that is to you living. And here I am thinking, what is the best way that I can make profit off of this? That's terrible thinking. And that is horrendously anti-society.
Yeah,
I should be thinking
it's anti-progress. It's anti-humanitarian. If you're
exactly,
it's that you're basically profiteering, and you could even go so far as to say you're holding the person's life hostage for the amount of money that, like, if the surgery that they need is going to be a life-saving procedure, and they say that they can't come up with the money, you're going, well, I guess you won't get that life-saving surgery, and you'll die.
Exactly.
You might as well hold a gun to their head and say, give me $100,000. It's essentially the same thing, except the only difference is a trigger has been pulled.
Exactly right. And those are the kind, again, this could be also sociopathic thinking, where I put your value on the fact, like, I don't think I need to save this person because he's a human. You're thinking, I'll only save this person if he pays me. So that's even further dissonance, or where it's like, well, and for him to have heat and electricity at his house, he needs to pay this amount, or I turn that off. Even if it's the middle of winter, it's not humanitarian. That's not normal. That's not
right. And in a not-for-profit model, where if the utility company is being run by either by the municipality or by a not-for-profit organization that has been assembled by the like a local election or something, that anything that they do, if it's set up as not-for-profit and then someone stops paying their gas bill in the middle of the winter, a not-for-profit can say, okay, well, fortunately, we had a little bit of a surplus. We can actually allow this person to slide a little bit and, see if we can maybe get them to pay their arrears in a month where they're not having such a hard time. But in the meantime, allow their gas to stay on. Their water pipes won't freeze, which, if they did, would cause additional damage to their house, putting them further in. Like, anytime that you run down to their last few dollars, the system crushes you. Like, overdraft fees. When you run out of money in your bank account, all of a sudden, supposedly you're supposed to have an extra $70, $80 for overdraft fees for the 3 or 4 debit card items that came through in one night.
Exactly right. I actually, it was with U.S. Bank. I actually went to court for it because I remember I overdrafted, I think it was something like $20. And over the weekend, I was overdrafted about $2,000. Because I was, I bought a stick of gum. I went to McDonald's. And I bought a lot of different things. And each time I overdrafted, they were hitting me with $35 in overdraft fees. And it just happened to be like, I think I made 100 purchases or something.
Right.
And obviously there is an issue that I don't have. And I told them, and this was my point of argument. I said, 1, why don't you just stop my card from working? 2, when I made and of course deposits take a day to work, whereas withdrawals are immediate. And they reorganize your withdrawals in such a way that your largest one goes first. So they
So you're more
calculate which
likely to
one
go under, and then all your small ones come through and ding, 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 rather than the small ones coming through first, so that they end up.
maybe there's only one overdraft.
Right.
Yeah, so
Right.
they will take the payment that will guarantee the overdraft, and then they will charge you for everything else, regardless of how it was. It's that, and this is what I'm saying. These systems are put in place to hinder you, whereas a bank, I think, should be a enabling entity. And same thing with medical care. Same thing with education. Same thing with. I mean. Even back when the U.S. was initially established, being president wasn't a career; it was a job.
Yeah.
You go there, you get paid your salary, you do your 4 years, and then you go back to whatever it was you were doing before. It was not a position where you sit there and you accumulate all the wealth in the world, and then you get out. You just go there. It's like the National Guard. You go there, you do it for however long you need to do it, and then you're out. So
there was no such thing as a career politician, because you couldn't make a career at being a politician because the money wasn't good enough, for a couple reasons. First of all, their salary was crap, and people just didn't. I think it didn't really occur to people back then to say, "Oh, I'll just take all kinds of money from my buddies in the tea industry or whatever." I'm sure there was some corruption going on, but nowadays you can be a career politician with all of the funds that you would normally have to make at a normal job. You can make from your salary as a politician, and then also from all the kickbacks, all of the, like, when you're a powerful person, you end up making powerful friends who then hook you up with all kinds of like special deals on stuff. You get in on the ground floor of an investment that no one else would have. I'm sure that the politicians are probably engaged in more insider trading than even Martha Stewart. Like, more about the backdoor dealings that get them these like lucrative opportunities. Like, okay, what's the guy from George Bush's vice president, and how he was involved with Halliburton, Dick Cheney, and like, does no one else see the conflict of interest here? Does no one else see that this guy is basically writing his own kickback check for having like hooked up all his buddies at Halliburton? It's just so. And what's so crazy is that to me it looks completely egregious and bald-faced and so outrageous, but 99% of the population doesn't. They either don't understand, or they know that it's happening and couldn't care less, and that's even more frightening than just not knowing.
Well, I think a lot of the population also are just tired, because I don't think they feel they can do anything anymore. And I mean, this is also another valid point. To be a politician, it might require the same sociopathy that being the head of a corporation might need, because you're not going there to be a leader. You're going there to just make as much fucking money as you can, and it's even worse.
And to shape society to your whim. Like, a lot of them are doing it because they want the power. They want to be able to be like, yeah, I was the guy that wrote that bill, and that shit's law now, man. You guys all better respect my, no public urination law, whatever. It's exerting power.
Exactly, but with corporations, I mean, they deserve to die, but at least with those, you kind of have your charter is to make money. But say something.
So at least you're doing what you're out there supposedly supposed to be doing. But with politicians, their stated purpose is to pass laws that are in the interest of the general population. But in reality, they end up passing laws that only benefit
them,
top 1% wealthiest people in the U.S., because they're favoring corporations that have no family to take care of, and no hospital bills to pay. All they're doing is paying their dividends to the people who are already rich enough that they didn't need it.
Exactly, and it's leaking down to a lot of sectors. Going back to say something like healthcare, your doctor is supposed to be somebody that is watching out for you and your health, but you've changed the model to where it's a profit-based model. So now his interest is not your health. His interest is generating revenue off of you. Should I cure cancer or should I keep him on treatment forever? What generates more profit? So it's leaking into every.
And even the people even the doctors who come in with the earnest, like the doctors who come into the system, genuinely like desiring to help people and prevent and cure diseases, the system ends up sort of forcing them into this position where if they're not doing enough surgeries that cost a certain amount of money per month, then they end up getting cut from the staff, and if if they don't carry enough insurance that covers any of their like malpractice suits that could come up, and people are. This is another byproduct. I think if people weren't so strapped for cash because of the way the system is built, there wouldn't be nearly as many frivolous lawsuits. I think the frivolous lawsuits are like kind of a symptom of a class of people who are so desperate to find something that will give them financial security that they're willing to go to these stupid, ridiculous lengths to try to extract value from someone else who, in their view, and maybe even rightfully so, didn't do anything more to deserve that money than this person did. Since they've been working their whole life, working 60 hours a week.
And you can't argue that a different system doesn't work. I think it's I'm trying to think, is it England or Canada? The doctors actually get incentivized for successful operations. So they have an incentive to do well. So say it's not how you generate revenue from somebody, but say somebody needs an open heart bypass surgery. They get bonuses for performing a successful heart bypass surgery.
Doctors lining up to try to get the surgery because they want the bonus for it, but they're all competing, saying, I'm going to be the person who has the best whip stitch in the entire hospital, so that I want them to pick me rather than
exactly. And the patient doesn't pay. I mean, they are in the system, but they don't pay for it. So that kind of model, it exists and it works. And that one, even if, say, you are a sociopath, that is still incentivizing model to do well. Where
there's plenty of totally functioning psychopaths and sociopaths in society who have learned over time to conform to what society expects of them. I'm sure there's probably plenty of sociopathic doctors who are doing a great job, not because they truly believe the Hippocratic Oath, but because they like making money. And it turns out that they can do that being a doctor.
You build a system that removes that issue out of it. So if your profit is from doing well, then people are motivated to do well. So that I think that's a very functional, good model. Where as the U.S. system, it's make as much money off of somebody who can't possibly pay for it.
Right. And it's I think with healthcare and the penal system, they're very similar in a certain sense, is where the prison system is designed from the ground up, from the laws all the way through the private prison systems, and the way that they're physically constructed, the sort of psychology studies that they've done of how and where to confine criminals, in a space together. They've designed the whole thing with recidivism in mind, to make it so that when people are done with their prison sentence, they get out, they've got no job skills, they've got a criminal record which keeps them from getting hired for a regular job, which means they're going to go to the black market probably to get or they're going to find some really, really crappy job where they're barely making enough money to get by, and when they do have an emergency that pops up, they do have to resort to criminal behavior to make ends meet. Either way, the whole system is designed to keep them cycling back through, and in those cases, the criminals aren't even the ones paying the money; it's the taxpayer paying the money to keep putting them back in prison.
Well, imagine this. I just thought of it, so feel free to punch holes. But imagine like a prison system to where a prison system to where the penal system gets rewarded if after like a 2 or 3 year review after the person gets out that they're not back in jail and that
Right.
they are working, then they would get bonuses or payment from that, to where the
Right.
prison now has to be invested in making sure that these people don't come back.
Yeah. So they'd be installing computers with access to the largest libraries of like free like online
College
classes.
courses,
They'd have college courses. They'd have they'd have motivational speakers coming in talking to them. They'd be like getting them hooked up with a psychologist and like someone to check in with them on the regular, like for a certain 6 months after they got out. They would even have that person on staff to be the guy that like checks in on them on a weekly basis and says, "Hey man, how's it going? Is your job treating you okay?" You know, they might even say, "Oh, you having a rough month? We'll spot you $500 to make sure that you don't end up going back to your your Coke supplier and
exactly
slinging
right.
again."
The
if
way
that were
it
the
would
system,
the way it would work is you get penalized if they come back in.
right.
So that would be I think, see, that kind of model, you still generate revenue, and people. That's kind of the bottom line for people. So I don't see why stuff like that would not work, because the current system is overly hostile. Like the educational system is hostile, the penal system is hostile, and the healthcare system is hostile.
The only, I mean, you said I could feel free to poke holes. I only see one place I could poke a hole in that, and so in a system where the prison is penalized for a previous inmate coming back for a second round, they would be in a position to be upset with that guy for screwing out on the outside and coming back, because he has now cost them money, in addition to being around for a while longer and being like a hassle on their hands that they have to take care of. He's also cost them money. It would be potentially a conflict that could get some kind of human rights violation stuff going on, where if prison guards were having to forego their annual bonus because this inmate screwed up on the outside and came back for a second run, those prison guards might be more likely to beat him up, or just conveniently neglect to make sure that he was protected from other inmates who might want to cause him harm for something. I think that there would be a potential for unequal treatment of prisoners in the system on their second time around, because of the fact that the prison was being penalized for their presence.
Well, I agree with you there, but is that really much worse than the current system that's going on? At least with this system.
I was saying that there's a potential gotcha in this. I'm not saying that it's any worse than our current system. It's definitely better than our current system, but it's something that would come up, and it's something that would probably have to be addressed in some way. There are laws on the books that if you're a whistleblower and you expose something illegal going on at your company, you're allowed to blow the whistle, and they can't fire you, and they can't do anything. They can't transfer you to a location that's way too far away from where you live. There's laws that say they can't bring retribution against you for doing the right thing, and so I think that they could do something similar, where they could pass laws that say anybody who's caught exacting revenge on an inmate who is in for his second round, because of the extra expense that he caused to him, would then be subject to 5 times more penalties, so that they would have no.
Exactly right. There's a lot of stuff that would have to go into it conceptually.
Yeah,
I like the idea of incentivizing things to be better, as opposed to the current system where the incentive is keep it bad.
Yeah, keep it limping along, keep it just functional enough to be able to charge money for it, because it's just barely enough to where it's not them just taking money from you and running. It's a little bit better than that, but that's about it.
Exactly right. So I think obviously there's going to be people resisting, because it's a lot harder to do something for your money, and this would be requiring them to do something for their money. It's like I have to educate these prisoners now. I have to take care of these prisoners now. I was just sticking them in a concrete box before and making money off them. So there's going to be resistance to that idea. But
Right.
I think even with the educational system, I think if the college produces a graduate who did everything he was supposed to do, and minimum GPA, and is successfully employed, that the university gets some sort of bonus. It's like this was one of your students, and he did what was required of him to get a 3.1 GPA, and he's gainfully employed. Okay, cool.
GPA
Here you guys
is a
go.
totally arbitrary scoring system too, though. I almost feel like on their actual like real world job placement scores, if you ask me, like if the college's real world desired outcome is higher employment figures, then they ought to be incentivized on job placement, so that they place a lot of importance on emphasizing the parts of the curriculum that are truly important to making them a better potential employee. Get rid of all this extra like gunk, filler material that they end up packing into these degrees to make it so they have to take more credit hours and pay more tuition. If they spent more of their budget on the things that actually mattered, and then took their whatever funds they were saving from not having to run these pointless classes that no one ever needs, and then put that into like an aggressive job placement regimen, that starts scouting places for them to work a year before they graduate, that would be way better at getting people into the system the way that they're supposed to be getting, as opposed to saying, okay, you got your diploma, have fun.
No, well, the point I was making was be a low achieving student. Like, say you get what's the minimum to pass 2.0?
To pass college?
The minimum GPA.
Well, the minimum is I think D is passing, and D is a 1. I think so. If you got a 1.0,
okay,
technically
so
be passing, but nobody would want you. But
well, and this is what I'm saying is I'm not saying that they get a bonus depending on the GPA, because you have to put the student accountable as well. So they tell the student, if you get the 3.0, then the process of being obligated to find that student gainful employment and such becomes apparent. But if the student just glides through college with a 1.0, then it's not the college's fault that he didn't get a job, because he just didn't do well. But if the student did what he had to do, and he's gainfully employed because of that, then the college gets something. Well, and I guess they should get something for any student graduating, but they would not get anything negative from a low achieving student not making it. And that could actually be a new way of conducting college. Is you have a contract with the college. You say that you will get, say, a 3.0. If we get the 3.0, then the college is obligated to find you gainful employment after your graduation. If you do not get the 3.0, then that's void of contract. You graduate, but they're not obligated for you.
Right.
So it's a sort of agreement between the student and the educational facility that you do what is required of you, and we will do what is required of us. Otherwise, you go off.
That brings up a kind of a catch-22, because a school that wants to avoid the additional costs involved in a job placement program for a large portion of their students would end up adjusting the grading criteria of all their classes to make anybody get over a certain GPA, so that they wouldn't have to pay for all these additional job placement things. So you'd have to figure out a way to make it so that they're like double incentivized for helping someone. Like if they got someone a job, that there would be a bonus that was part of that paid for all the expenses that they had outlaid in the process of running that program, so that they wouldn't be trying to avoid the cost.
Exactly right. Something like that. I have no problem with incentives. if you put them in the right place, I think they can do great things. So that way, you as a college student going in, you're going to say, okay, I'm putting in $70,000, but in return for my $70,000, I will get job placement.
Yep.
So you feel better. And then the college also gets a kickback from whatever branch of government that says, okay, you found this person a job. He will be a taxpayer, a higher bracket taxpayer. So here is your kickback.
Right. And they could even figure out a way to put it into the accounting so that money is actually taken out of that student's first year of working, like their income tax or whatever, just immediately have that money kicked back to the college or something, that kind of thing would be a great, that would actually keep it really tidy. You just say that if you get this kid a job placement, the very first year of employment, all the income taxes that student generates come straight back to the college, and because it's all in taxes, it wouldn't have to be taxed as like as income or anything for the institution.
I think that's a great idea.
There's all kinds of ways they can make it better.
And this is all stuff that you and I are just talking about just off the top of our heads. And you have people that this is their career, and they're not doing this. So I don't get it's anything.
The reason is because it's their career and they like things the way they are right now, because they don't want to have to do a whole bunch of paperwork that they're not familiar with. They'd rather just keep filling out those TPS reports and keep cashing their paycheck, punching their time clock, going home and watching Jersey Shore.
Exactly right. And I guess this is about as far as as this topic goes before we start just repeating what we're saying. But it's essentially just wrapping it up. The screwed up way that we make money is making sociopaths out of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And there needs to be,
or at least forcing people to act like sociopaths in order to continue to exist in the modern society. If we're like encouraging antisocial, psychotic psychopathic and sociopathic behaviors just in order to get by, that's really selecting the wrong kind of behaviors and rewarding that. And we ought to be trying to find ways to make the system reward behaviors and methodologies,
beneficial behaviors
that will lift people out of the muck rather than drive them deeper into it. And I guess this is a call to action. Those of you who are watching this, if you you don't have to be an academic to come up with good ideas about how the world could get better. If we get enough people talking about better ways to do things, that's how things get on ballot initiatives. Voting does matter, and especially in local elections and in municipal stuff. We're talking about turning a local utility company into a not-for-profit. That has happened. That happened in Boulder. The voters there did it. If you think that your voice doesn't count, don't stop talking. Talk louder and talk more often with more people and get your ideas spreading, because good ideas have a tendency to float to the surface and gather momentum with more people talking about them.
Exactly right. And stop talking about things that don't really matter, especially if you're in a situation where you could benefit from something like this, and talk about something that matters.
Mm-hmm.
You might not be the one that can do something about it, but
you're going to talk about the mindless nonsense on TV. You're going to talk about, oh, did you see The Office last night? How about them donkeys? If you're going to strike up a conversation with a stranger, strike up something that might actually enlighten them and get them thinking about something that, who knows, they might end up talking to someone who talks to someone who knows a senator who decides that's a really great idea. I'm going to put that in a bill and see if we can get it passed. And that is, if everybody decides we're not going to just be downtrodden anymore, and even if we're being pushed down by the system, we're not going to act like we are. We're going to act like we matter, because if we do, we all act like we matter, we actually will.
It's been known to not adding just a little bit onto that. Not that the Arab Spring has been the absolutely most positive thing that's ever happened, ever, but conceptually, it rings true. If enough people get up and do something, the people up top have to take notice and act accordingly. So, as much as I rag on people, tweeting and Facebooking and in such ways that I don't think are that helpful, getting out there and making your voice heard is something worthwhile. So maybe instead of tweeting 10 times, maybe tweet 5 times and go out and say something. I'm not saying
when you
aggressive.
tweet something that provokes thought. Tweet something that gets people discussing. If you're just tweeting a picture of your lunch, that really isn't enriching anybody's life, and it's not provoking discussion. And if you're going to be putting words out there, they ought to be words that people should be likely to consider, ponder, and respond thoughtfully.
Exactly right. Well, anything else to add?
I like what we did today. This was a good one.
I like it. I like it. It felt important. and I like how some of the ideas came out at the end regarding possible alternatives to how things currently function.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I love that awesome tablecloth on your head. Quietly plotting my demise, are you?
Oh, I'm plotting something.
I'm going to come pick you up at the airport when you get back to Denver, and you're just going to have a pie to put in my face. Got this in duty free, bitch.
Denver. I do miss Denver.
Oh, I forgot to talk about how you're in that kind of awkward middle stage where the U.S. Do you want to spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes talking about your recent experiences with that and try to maybe talk about the societal reasons for that?
Well, I'm in a particular situation that I think is a relatively recent phenomenon for Arabs. I'm sure other cultures and such have run into it, as most people who are probably listening to the podcast. I lived in the States for about 19 years, since I was about 13 or so. So growing up and everything, essentially for me, was the U.S., but I was born and raised in Kuwait. Now, in the States, initially there was an issue of race and racism just because of where I was from and my name. But after a while, I did notice that it was not as big of an issue as the years went by. And I think I was lucky enough to be in a state where racism was in places like, say, California or Texas or such. Colorado seems to be pretty open-minded. Now, the issue that I've run into, I came back to Kuwait in 2010. And now I am experiencing almost double racism. Because here, despite how I dress or look, my speech and I guess just how I conduct myself is considered very foreign here. And I was applying for jobs here over the past few months, and I got a reply from 2 in Kuwait. And one of them, the problem, I was overqualified, which I guess happens to a lot of people. And the second one, which prompted this mini discussion, is the fact that the other company said I was too Western to be employed there. So that to me is very disconcerting, considering I don't know how much more it can be. Because it's, I guess, if you were black and you were not hired because you were not black enough, it would be a similar thing. And to compound on that issue, I'm having a hard time applying stateside with cold applications just due to my name. I'm trying to work with people like Jimmy and friends of mine that personally know recruiters that can, as silly as it sounds, talk on my behalf. And the to somebody that doesn't know me, that just reads my name, they can be very, especially with the current state of affairs in the world today, can be turned off. So it's a very peculiar situation, and I'm not sure how many other Arabs are experiencing it to where they are discriminated against internationally, and then they get discriminated against back to their country of origin. So it's a very weird place to be, and I don't quite know what to think about it. It hurts, but it's a weird situation, and I think it's I really don't know what it is. It's you can. The funny thing is being Arab is technically still considered white. A European in the States would not be discriminated against, and a white person here in Kuwait would actually be very desired. We love overpaying and hiring Europeans and Americans. But
they'll hire an actual Westerner, but they think that somehow you being Arab, but then also being Western somehow makes you like an unknown quantity, and they're like, oh, I don't know, man, a little bit of a wild card there.
Exactly right, and I don't quite understand it. It's a very peculiar thing that I saw hints of in the first couple years I was here, but the last couple months really hammered the point home. I was sitting on this interview where one of the hiring managers was on the conference call, and she kept asking, "Is this person Arab? How was he educated outside? Why has he worked at all these other companies outside? And why is he not wearing local clothing?" And which is very bizarre to me. Whereas, you'll see a lot of Americans here, they'll go into an interview in a polo shirt and shorts, and they'll just say, "Oh, you're American, you're hired." Me personally, I usually I like suits. I wear suits everywhere. And they saw that as a very weird, undesirable trait. So I don't know. I guess there's not really much of a point to be made here. It's just a very weird situation to be discriminated against, like both internationally and locally.
It's not so much that there is a singular point to be made here, but it's something that we should point out as this is happening in the world. That most people who are watching this probably have never had anything like this happen to them, and probably won't because of the color of their skin, which just underscores the fact that racism is still a problem. And it's not just the minorities that we consider our traditional, persecuted minorities in the U.S. It's minorities in general in the world. There are minorities in certain parts of the world who would be considered not minorities here. And it's the circumstances that determine the circumstances and the general population of the vicinity around them that determines whether they're being treated right or not, which is just, it's evidence that we have a lot further to go as a species before we have overcome this totally superficial, it's xenophobia is what it boils down to. People are innately afraid of something that's different from themselves, and we are not homogenous species. There's a lot of different shapes and sizes and colors and differences of opinion and religion, but on the DNA level, we're all like only 0.02% or whatever different from each other. So what really should matter is the fact that we are human and we should be looking out for each other, because if we don't look out for each other, there's really not any other species out there that's going to be doing it for us. So.
Exactly right. So, which ties in nicely. I'm looking for a job stateside. So
hire this man.
All right. Cool. Well, we appreciate you guys tuning in. We really enjoyed this particular episode. I think we're finally starting to get into the stride of the show. The last 1.5 attempts were pretty
they were a little on the unpolished side. I'll say it that way.
Unpolished side. So we appreciate you guys tuning in, and hopefully we will see you for episode 3.
All right. Be good, everybody.